Well, it really began, of course, with a book, and that was a book by Jacob Boehme, who was a German mystic from the 17th century. The book, which I'm going to show to you, is called Aurora, oder Morgenröte im Aufgang. In English it means aurora or dayspring. And it was a book which Joost Ritman, the founder of the library, was given by his mother as a present on his 23rd birthday. And I would like to read to you a passage from that work, because I think it tells you how fascinating Mr. Ritman found Jacob Boehme. So it's from the preface by Jacob Boehme, and he's comparing the whole of philosophy and astrology and theology to a tree. So, and he says, the garden of this tree signifies the world, the soil signifies nature, the stock of the tree signifies the stars. By the branches are meant the elements, the fruit which grows on this tree signifies mankind, the sap in the tree denotes the pure deity. Now men were made out of nature, the stars and the elements, but God the Creator reigns in all, just like the sap does in the whole tree. And it's also actually one of the most pregnant lines from the Hermetic Tabula Smaragdina. That which is above is like that which is below. So it's very appropriate, really, to compare your question or your remark about macrocosm and microcosm, because that's, in a way, is what the library is all about, the relationship between man and God, and the relationship between macrocosm and microcosm is a relationship and a bond which was also celebrated by Hermes Trismegistus, who is the name giver of this library. Amphitheatrum Sapientiae Aeternae, which has wonderful engravings, and I'd like to show one of them, which is an engraving of the emerald tablet, so the Tabula Smaragdina, with the text of the emerald tablet attributed to Hermes in Latin and in German. This contains that pregnant phrase, that which is above is like that which is below. And it's really beautiful rendition, because the myth of the emerald tablet is that the words of Hermes were found engraved in this gemstone in emerald, and so you have here literally the words engraved in stone. So Boehme was the start of the collection, and that took Joost Ritman as a young man to many places in Amsterdam. And imagine there's a story that he visits one of the most renowned antiquarian booksellers in Amsterdam. His name is Nico Schors. And Joost Ritman, interested in alchemy, mysticism, Hermetica, Rosicrucianism, rings the doorbell, and he's led to the august presence of Mr. Schors, and he says, I'm looking for the Rosicrucian manifestos. And Schors says, he's an antiquarian, he's really very well aware of the rarity of these little pamphlets, says, so am I. And that was the beginning of a beautiful working relationship between Joost Ritman and Schors in this particular case, and has been collecting ever since, and still is. Yes, Boehme is really a very appropriate author. He's the start of the collection, but Boehme is inseparably linked with Amsterdam, because it was here in Amsterdam that his books were printed. Boehme was a German mystic, and his works were banned in Germany, where he came from, Görlitz. He was banned from publishing. So what happened was that the manuscripts were taken to Amsterdam, and they were published by an Amsterdam merchant called Abraham Willemszoon van Beierland. He also translated Jacob Boehme. He was a disciple of Boehme, and Beierland, this wise merchant, also translated the Corpus Hermeticum into Dutch in 1643. So the case of Boehme really tells you that Amsterdam was a free haven, a centre where books could be printed that were forbidden in their own country. And a French mystic like Poiret said, for example, that almost everything could be printed in Amsterdam, and he really admired the capital, Amsterdam, capital of the Dutch Republic, for being a centre of the freedom of the press. And it was also here in Amsterdam that the De Geer family, wealthy merchant family, lived in the house with the heads. It's that beautiful building on the one of the Amsterdam canals, and it's a landmark in Amsterdam. The library will be moving to this house in the near future. And the De Heers, merchants, were sponsors, were patrons of dissenters and idealists alike. So, I mean, it's a very modest work by the look of it, but Friedrich Brecklin was a Lutheran minister who had to flee to the Republic, first to Zwolle, then to Amsterdam, and as you can see, had his works printed in Amsterdam, in this case, a work printed in 1663. But he was an idealist, a man wanting to defend social justice also, and he found printing presses ready and willing to print his works. And the other famous name, of course, is Comenius, who was a guest of the De Geer family for a while. He lived in Amsterdam, and this is the title page, and you can see here that it's printed in Amsterdam, and Laurens de Geer sponsored the edition. So in a way, Amsterdam was also very much a multicultural society. For instance, the Sephardic Jews from Spain and Portugal were allowed to settle here and practice their religion. And that beautiful synagogue, which was opened in 1675, is a wonderful example of this tolerance, which was also commercially motivated, of course, because Sephardic Jews were merchants and it was good for trade, so it was good for Amsterdam. It's also in Amsterdam where the first Hebrew printing press in the Dutch Republic was established by Manasseh ben Israel in 1626. And I'll show you a copy of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, printed by Manasseh in 1635. Yes, you're right, in all fairness, there are certainly limits to the tolerance in Amsterdam, and a case, very famous case, is that of Spinoza, who published his Tractatus Theologico-Politicus in Amsterdam in 1670, but it was printed anonymously. His name doesn't appear on the title page, and the imprint is fictitious. It was supposedly printed in Hamburg by Heinrich Kunrad, but it was really printed here in Amsterdam by Jan Riewets, who was his printer. And we also know that Spinoza didn't want his Tractatus Theologico-Politicus, theological, political treatise, to be published in Dutch. And he knew that the translation was ready. There is a letter, has been preserved, in which he says, I don't know who translated my treatise, and of course he knew it very well, but I don't want it published because the ministers are at me, and he dreaded the ministers of Amsterdam, and he knew that his treatise contained what they called heretical views. For instance, there is a whole chapter devoted to miracles, and it's very commonsensical. It says miracles are not signs from God, they're just natural phenomena which the people at the time didn't understand, so they call them miracles. You know, it makes sense. But to the ministers, this was sacrilege, because a miracle is a direct sign from God. Now, and so Spinoza's treatise was published in Dutch posthumously, and you know that his motto is cauter, be aware. Be cautious. One of his friends, Adrien Courbach, was not so cautious, because he published a dictionary in Dutch of loanwords, but he used the dictionary to enlighten the people of the Dutch Republic. In several entries, he tried to tell them that, you know, the only good religion is a rational religion, and he tried to free people from superstition. And we have a copy in the library which Joost Ritman bought from Antiquariat Spinoza, aptly named, here in Amsterdam. And it's a beautiful copy because it has an index at the end, a contemporary index of offending entries. And the antiquarian who sold the book to Mr. Ritman, Mr. Burgers, the late Mr. Burgers, said, I think this was made by one of the ministers to help the judges in the trial of Adrien Courbach, because he was tried and sentenced, and he died in prison for publishing this book. Fama Fraternitatis, oder Entdeckung, Discovery, der Bruderschaft des Rosenkreuzes, so the discovery of the Rosicrucian Brotherhood. This is an edition printed in 1615, as you can see, but it was first printed in 1614. And this work caused great excitement in the German lands. It's a wonderful story also of adventure, of magic, and it really resonated in the German lands. I mean, you must consider the eve of the 30 Years' War, so very troubled times. And the authors of the Rosicrucian manifestos were followers of Paracelsus, and Paracelsus, Swiss reformer, was a man, he was a very ethical man, and the Rosicrucians had a rule that it was actually a rule of the order that people should be treated and cured, in German it says umsonst, gratis, so not for money, not for any commercial gain, but really a humanitarian purpose. So really the reformations of Comenius and the authors of the Rosicrucian manifestos are very similar, and they also reverberated in England with the circle of Samuel Hartlib. I've got a copy of a letter Comenius wrote to Hartlib, one of the manuscripts in the library. So thanks to this tradition of free thought, there is a library, and the library founded by Joost Ritman, which contains many of the works on the freedom of thought that are printed in Amsterdam. We now have this wonderful library, and there's also a chair of Hermetic Philosophy, which was established in Amsterdam mainly due to the existence of this library. So two institutions which make Amsterdam a wonderful place and which really make Amsterdam the Hermetic capital of the world. Because it's called Binder's Waste. It's actually a manuscript on vellum, in this case, and it's part of a manuscript that was cut up and used by the binder to bind books. Binder's Waste.